You know, nature has this incredible way of throwing curveballs at us when we least expect it. Today, I want to share with you one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever come across, a tale that challenges everything we think we know about wild animals and domestic pets. Picture this. A domestic dog becomes a mother to 3 bobcat cubs. Sounds impossible, right? But this actually happened, and what unfolded next will blow your mind. The unlikely beginning. It all started when 3 tiny bobcat kittens were found orphaned in the wild. These were your typical house cats. Bobcats are fierce predators, weighing up to 40 pounds when fully grown, with razor-sharp claws and hunting instincts that have been perfected over millions of years of evolution. Now here's where it gets interesting. A female dog, who had recently given birth to her own puppies, did something that defied all natural instincts. She adopted these wild bobcat cubs as her own. Can you imagine? This domestic dog, whose ancestors were wolves thousands of years ago, suddenly became the surrogate mother to 3 future apex predators. The science behind cross-species adoption. What makes this story even more fascinating is the science behind it. You see, maternal hormones are incredibly powerful. When a mother dog is nursing, her body produces oxytocin, the same hormone that creates bonds between human mothers and their babies. This hormone doesn't discriminate based on species. It simply says protect and nurture the young. But here's what most people don't realize about bobcats. They're not just bigger versions of house cats. These are serious predators. Adult bobcats can leap 12 feet horizontally and 8 feet vertically. They have night vision that's 6 times better than humans, and their bite force is strong enough to crush small bones. Growing up wild, or not. As the weeks turned into months, something extraordinary happened. These bobcat cubs began exhibiting dog-like behaviors. They would wag their tails when excited, come when called by name, and even learn to play fetch. It was as if they were caught between 2 worlds, their wild instincts and their domesticated upbringing. But nature has its own timeline, and you can't fool genetics forever. As these cubs approached their first birthday, their true nature began to emerge. Their hunting drive intensified, their territorial instincts kicked in, and suddenly, the family dynamic that had worked so beautifully began to shift. The unthinkable moment. Here's where the story takes that heart-stopping turn. One day, the inevitable happened. The survival instincts that had been dormant for months suddenly awakened. The largest of the 3 bobcats, the one who had been the gentlest, the most dog-like, looked at his adoptive mother not as family, but as something else entirely. In that moment, millions of years of evolution kicked in. The wild called back its children. What this teaches us about nature. Now, before you think this is just a tragic tale, let me share what this really reveals about the natural world. This story shows us that animals are far more adaptable than we give them credit for. It demonstrates that nurture can temporarily override nature, but it also reminds us that wild animals, no matter how they're raised, remain wild at their core. The dog's maternal instinct to protect and nurture transcended species barriers. The bobcat's ability to adapt and learn from their surrogate mother showed incredible behavioral plasticity. But ultimately, their genetic programming prevailed, not out of malice or ingratitude, but because that's simply what nature intended. The bigger picture. This incredible story reflects something we see throughout the animal kingdom. From wolves adopting bear cubs to elephants caring for orphan rhinos, cross-species adoption isn't as rare as you might think. It happens because the drive to nurture the young is one of the most powerful forces in nature. But it also serves as a crucial reminder for those who think they can keep wild animals as pets. These bobcats didn't become aggressive because they were cruel, they simply grew into what they were always meant to be. Wild animals belong in the wild, not because we don't love them enough, but because we love them too much to deny their true nature. The legacy. Today, stories like this help wildlife rehabilitators understand the delicate balance between helping orphaned wild animals and preparing them for their eventual return to nature. The dog who raised those bobcat cubs gave them something precious, a chance at survival during their most vulnerable weeks. But she also taught us that love sometimes means letting go when the time is right. The next time you see a wildlife documentary or hear about unusual animal friendships, remember this story. Remember that nature is both more flexible and more determined than we often realize. And perhaps most importantly, remember that the wildest stories are often the truest ones of all. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a dog and 3 bobcats. It was about the incredible complexity of life itself, and how sometimes the most unexpected relationships teach us the most profound lessons about what it truly means to be wild. Picture this. You're driving down a scorching Texas highway when traffic suddenly grinds to a halt. But this isn't your typical fender bender or construction zone. Instead, there's something extraordinary blocking the road, a tiny bobcat kitten, no bigger than a house cat, refusing to budge from the asphalt. This is exactly what happened to Officer Sarah Winters on Highway 83. What started as a routine wildlife call would soon become one of the most remarkable animal rescue stories you've ever heard. The mysterious highway standoff. When Sarah arrived at the scene, she expected to find a confused or injured animal that simply needed to be relocated. Instead, she discovered something far more intriguing. This wasn't just any bobcat. This little survivor was wearing a tracking device with a blue emergency marker. But here's where it gets really interesting. The kitten wasn't just randomly crossing the road. She was deliberately trying to get human attention. You see, bobcats are naturally secretive creatures. They're the masters of stealth in the animal kingdom, typically going to great lengths to avoid human contact. So when a young bobcat deliberately blocks traffic and refuses to retreat, you know something extraordinary is happening. The unlikely search and rescue mission. Dr. Stephen Mitchell, a wildlife biologist with over 25 years of experience, immediately recognized that this behavior was unprecedented. The tracking device bore the registration number RW 7734, which matched a missing hiker named Robert Whitley, a wildlife rehabilitator who had vanished during a solo hiking trip. Here's where the story takes an incredible turn. The bobcat, named Nova, began leading Sarah and Dr. Mitchell into the forest. For over a mile, this young animal maintained the perfect distance, close enough to follow, but far enough to feel safe. She was essentially conducting her own search and rescue operation. The remarkable bond. What they discovered was Robert Whitley trapped under a fallen tree at the bottom of a 30-foot ravine, his legs severely injured and unable to reach his emergency beacon. In a moment of desperate ingenuity, he had attached his emergency location marker to Nova's tracking harness and sent her to find help. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. Nova wasn't trained like a search dog. Robert had been rehabilitating her since she was found as an orphaned kitten. Through their work together, she had developed an unusual association. Roads meant humans, and humans meant safety. When Robert was in trouble, Nova instinctively knew where to go. The science behind the miracle. What fascinates researchers about Nova's case is how it challenges our understanding of wildlife behavior. Bobcats typically have excellent problem-solving abilities, but they use them for hunting and survival, not human interaction. Nova demonstrated something called cross-species empathy, the ability to recognize distress in another species and take action to help. Dr. Mitchell documented that Nova's cognitive development was exceptional. She retained enough wild instinct to survive independently, yet formed selective bonds with humans that allowed her to navigate between both worlds. This is incredibly rare in wildlife rehabilitation. A new chapter in conservation. Nova's rescue mission didn't just save Robert's life. It revolutionized how we think about wildlife rehabilitation. Instead of the traditional approach of minimizing human contact before release, Nova became the first wildlife ambassador in a groundbreaking new program. Today, Nova lives at the Texas Wildlife Ambassador Center, where she helps educate thousands of visitors about bobcat behavior and conservation. Her habitat mimics the wild while allowing her to participate in research that's advancing our understanding of feline cognition. The ripple effect. The publicity from Nova's heroic act generated enough donations to fund wildlife conservation programs for years. A new license plate featuring her image raises ongoing funds for habitat preservation. Most importantly, her story has inspired a generation of wildlife enthusiasts who might never have otherwise connected with conservation efforts. What this teaches us. Nova's story reminds us that intelligence and empathy exist throughout the animal kingdom in ways we're only beginning to understand. She didn't perform a trained behavior. She made a conscious decision to seek help for someone she cared about. That level of cognitive complexity in a species we often dismiss as just wild animals should make us reconsider how we view our relationship with wildlife. Officer Sarah Winters, who first responded to that unusual traffic jam, now serves as a liaison between law enforcement and wildlife rehabilitation programs. She often reflects on how a routine call became a life-changing experience that opened her eyes to the hidden intelligence of the animals sharing our world. The legacy continues. As I write this, Nova is thriving as an ambassador for her species. Visitors to the center often comment on her intelligence, how she seems to recognize individuals, responds to her name, and even appears to enjoy the educational programs she participates in. Robert Whitley has fully recovered and continues his rehabilitation work, though he admits that Nova will always be special. Their bond, forged through mutual trust and tested in a life-or-death situation, represents something unprecedented in wildlife rehabilitation. The next time you see wildlife crossing a road or appearing in unexpected places, remember Nova's story. Sometimes, these encounters aren't accidents. They're opportunities for connection, understanding, and maybe even a chance to save a life. What makes this story so powerful isn't just the rescue itself, but what it reveals about the potential for understanding between species. In a world where human-wildlife conflict is increasingly common, Nova showed us that cooperation and communication are possible in ways we never imagined. That tiny bobcat who stopped traffic on a Texas highway didn't just save one man's life. She opened our minds to the extraordinary intelligence and compassion that exists in the wild world all around us. Picture this. You're living peacefully in the mountains when a wild bobcat shows up at your door with an injured kitten. Sounds like fiction, right? Well, this extraordinary true story challenges everything we think we know about the boundaries between wild and domestic. In the secluded foothills of North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains, Jaime Carter had traded her corporate law career for something far more meaningful: wildlife photography. At 42, she'd found her sanctuary in her grandmother's renovated cabin, surrounded by 20 acres of pristine woodland. Here's what makes this story fascinating. Bobcats are incredibly elusive creatures. Most people living in bobcat territory never see one in their entire lives, despite these cats being surprisingly common throughout North America. Jaime's first encounter with a female bobcat happened during peak autumn colors in October. Now, here's something most people don't realize about bobcats. They're perfectly sized predators, typically weighing between 15 to 35 pounds, with females being smaller than males. Their spotted coats aren't just beautiful, they're evolutionary masterpieces that provide perfect camouflage in dappled forest light. What struck me about Jaime's approach was her restraint. Instead of trying to get closer or take more photos, she simply observed. This is crucial because bobcats have what wildlife biologists call a flight distance, the minimum distance they need to feel safe from humans. By respecting this boundary, Jaime unknowingly began building something unprecedented. When winter approached and Jaime noticed the bobcat looked thin, she made a decision that goes against conventional wildlife wisdom. She began supplemental feeding. Here's the science behind why this usually backfires. Regular feeding typically creates dependency and habituation, making wild animals lose their natural fear of humans. But Jaime consulted with Dr. Eleanor Martin, a wildlife biologist, who gave her the golden rule: minimal, irregular feeding with absolute distance maintenance. What's remarkable is that Jaime noticed the bobcat was likely a mother. Female bobcats are fiercely protective, and the fact that this mother was accepting food while caring for young shows just how desperate her situation was. Bobcat mothers typically give birth to 1 to 4 kittens after a 60-day gestation period, and those kittens are completely dependent for their first 2 months of life. Then came that devastating January storm. 3 days of brutal cold and over 2 feet of snow, conditions that can be deadly for wildlife. When Jaime discovered the erratic tracks with no sign of the smaller kitten prints, my heart sank. Something was terribly wrong. What happened next defies every textbook on wild animal behavior. The mother bobcat appeared on Jaime's porch, a space she'd never approached before, with her injured kitten. This behavior is so unprecedented that wildlife experts are still studying it. Think about it. A wild predator, programmed by millions of years of evolution to avoid humans, deliberately brought her most precious possession to seek help from the very species she should fear most. The kitten, later named Milo, had suffered a compound fracture, a break where the bone pierces through the skin. In the wild, this would typically be a death sentence. But here's where human intervention created a second chance. The 3-hour journey to the Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center became a race against time, with hypothermia and infection as constant threats. Dr. Whitaker's assessment revealed something wildlife rehabilitators face constantly: the cruel irony of saving a life. Yes, they could heal Milo's injuries, but the extensive human contact required during his recovery period meant he was developing habituation. This is the heartbreaking reality of wildlife rehabilitation. Sometimes saving an animal means they can never return to the wild. At 5 months old when injured, Milo was at a critical developmental stage. Bobcat kittens naturally begin learning to hunt around 3 to 4 months, perfecting these skills by 8 to 10 months. Missing this crucial learning period while in human care meant Milo's wild instincts were being replaced by comfort with human presence. What touches me most about this story is Jaime's response to this reality. Instead of simply letting Milo go to a distant sanctuary, she committed to becoming a certified wildlife rehabilitator. This isn't just about obtaining permits. It involves extensive training in animal behavior, nutrition, veterinary care, and enrichment techniques. She literally restructured her entire life around keeping her promise to a wild mother. The enclosure Jaime built wasn't just a cage. It was a carefully designed habitat incorporating natural elements like trees, rocks, and flowing water. Modern wildlife enclosure design focuses on providing behavioral enrichment that allows animals to express natural behaviors even in captivity. For bobcats, this means climbing opportunities, hiding spots, and hunting simulations. But here's the most extraordinary part: the mother bobcats continued visits. After Milo's arrival at Jaime's property, his mother began appearing regularly, sometimes engaging in silent communication through the enclosure mesh. This behavior challenges our understanding of wild animal emotional capacity and social bonds. Wildlife biologists call this contact through barriers, a phenomenon observed in various species where family members maintain connection even when separated by physical barriers. The fact that the mother bobcat accepted this arrangement suggests an intelligence and emotional complexity that many people underestimate in wild animals. Over time, the mother's visits naturally decreased, following the normal pattern of bobcat family separation. In the wild, young bobcats typically disperse from their mother's territory by 9 to 12 months of age. The mother's gradual withdrawal wasn't abandonment, it was natural progression. What makes this story so powerful isn't just the unusual trust between species, but what it reveals about coexistence. Jaime didn't try to make Milo into a pet or the mother into a friendly neighbor. She respected their wild nature while providing necessary intervention when nature alone wasn't enough. This story also highlights the complex reality of modern wildlife conservation. As human development continues to fragment natural habitats, these intersections between human and wild lives become increasingly common. Sometimes the choice isn't between perfect wild freedom and captivity, it's between survival with compromise and no survival at all. Trail cameras still occasionally capture the mother bobcat patrolling the property edges, sometimes pausing near Milo's enclosure. These glimpses suggest that their bond, while transformed, endures in some form. It's a reminder that wild animals have emotional lives and family connections that we're only beginning to understand. The broader lesson here goes beyond one bobcat family. It's about recognizing that conservation isn't always about maintaining perfect separation between human and wild worlds. Sometimes it's about finding ways to coexist that honor both our human capacity for compassion and the intrinsic value of wild lives. Jamie's story demonstrates that extraordinary trust can develop between species when approached with respect, knowledge, and genuine commitment to welfare over sentimentality. The mother bobcat's desperate gamble paid off not because Jamie anthropomorphized the situation, but because she responded with appropriate action guided by scientific understanding and ethical responsibility. In our increasingly connected but often nature-disconnected world, stories like this remind us that we share this planet with creatures capable of remarkable intelligence, emotion, and trust. The question isn't whether we should intervene in nature, but how we can do so responsibly when intervention becomes necessary for survival. The greatest gift in this story wasn't just Milo's survival or even the unusual trust of his mother. It was the transformation of understanding, proof that the boundaries between wild and human worlds are more permeable and complex than we often imagine, and that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, we're offered the extraordinary privilege of being trusted by the wild.